See if it works. Yay!
Yay!
Go, Michael. Well, welcome everyone. This is our April edition of our faculty development seminars. And today we have a very special guest with us, Ms. Sylvia from UCCS. And she, as we go through these, right, we've been looking at every little subset, kind of talking about the different elements to consider. And I know that writing a teaching philosophy is something that is pretty personal, pretty unique, but Sylvia's going to provide us some context for that, especially for you grad students who might be listening to this that are interested in going into being faculty, and giving you a little bit of an orientation to that. So just keep in mind that we're going to have a May and a June session as well on other topics. So please feel free to share these recordings with your students, with your faculty, with your fellow coworkers, and have as many robust discussions on this as you can. So Sylvia, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts today.
Oh, I'm very happy to do so. Teaching is certainly one of my great loves of the faculty role, so it's fun to be able to share this topic with you. So thank you all for joining. I am Sylvia Mendez, Professor and Chair of Leadership in the College of Education here at UCCS. So to get us started, I'd love to know a little bit about who you are. So if you could tell me your name, kind of what you do, your interest in this session, and then just a favorite teaching experience that you might have had as a teacher or as a student. And so Matt, I'm going to pick on you.
That's perfectly fine. My name is Matt Paulson. I'm in the School of Computing at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah, just a little bit north of Salt Lake City. I am a new-ish faculty member. I just received my doctorates this last year and got bumped up to the tenure track, which now one of the requirements of the tenure track is to have a teaching philosophy. I came from industry, and so I know exactly zero about ginning up a teaching philosophy, and so that's kind of why I'm here today. Probably some very interesting experiences over the last, let's call it 2 or 3 years, teaching through COVID is where the students have gotten that aha moment, right? Like everything just kind of lights up and all just kind of clicks into place, right? And they finally know why their password has to be 17 or more characters and have all these password complexity rules and stuff like that, right? It's very, 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 very cool. And those little moments, right? They're not like a constant stream of aha moments, unfortunately, but those little moments are what, for me, what I really enjoy, what kind of makes it all worth it at the end.
Well, thank you for sharing, Matt. My favorite teaching experience is very similar to yours, and I love teaching our Introduction to Research and Statistics course. It's a master's level course here, and students are so afraid. They don't know what we're talking about, new terms, new ideas. And then by the end of the class, they have that same aha moment. Oh, that's why testing is important, or that's why now we're under an improvement plan because our test scores are now at the standard deviation level. And so I just love that experience when it's all coming together for the students. So thank you for sharing. Goals for today's session. At the end, hopefully you're going to be able to explain the purpose of a teaching philosophy, articulate the components of a teaching philosophy, and then identify the key ways to approach writing your own. So to kind of orientate us to teaching, I wanted to share a work actually done in 2008. It's considered seminal to the teaching philosophy. And what was interesting, these authors did a research study where they surveyed faculty search committees at US colleges and universities in humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. And what they found is that the teaching philosophy, 91.5% of them said is important and very important in the hiring process, which they suggest means this is not something to just throw together. You want to have some meaningful information in there. They also looked by institutional type, and only those that they consider to be doctoral extensive, which means they graduate over 50 PhD students in 15 different disciplines, which is a very small group of higher education institutions, ranked research potential higher than teaching ability. It was all no significant difference at the master's, bachelor's, and doctoral intensive. And what was interesting by discipline is things kind of fell the way people thought they would. In humanities, teaching ability ranked significantly higher than one's research potential. In social sciences, there was no significant difference, but in natural sciences, research potential was ranked significantly higher than the teaching ability. But again, if we think about this overall, the vast majority, over 90%, consider teaching ability just as important, and note it as important or very important. So let's start from the beginning. What's the purpose here? So a teaching philosophy is a brief, personal, reflective statement that gives your audience, which could be vast, right? This is something you could share with your students. This is something you could share with your peers, something that a hiring committee might want. But even as you go through the promotion and tenure process, usually you need to articulate these kinds of ideas. And really what you're providing is insight into the beliefs about teaching and learning in a classroom, but also in advising and mentoring students. We often think of the teaching work that occurs just in a classroom, but your ability to advise and mentor students well and articulate your approach can be just as powerful as what you're doing in front of a classroom. And so it's really important, again, to articulate the approach, what successes you've had, what challenges you might have had, and then how you course correct in that way. So the purpose is really to help your audience, which could be very broad, develop a clear picture of who you are as a teacher in the context of your discipline. So your discipline should really speak to how your teaching philosophy comes to play, right? So if you are in a deeply practical discipline, you probably want to give students opportunities to practice, right? And to apply. And so you want to be thinking about what that disciplinary context is and how you're going to speak that language to those within your discipline, but outside your discipline as well. Teaching philosophies are typically pretty short, 2 pages at max. And what you want to focus on in this first person narrative is specific concrete examples of what you do as a teacher, what you expect learners to do in the context of your teaching. So there's some components of a teaching philosophy that are considered pretty typical. Again, as I just noted, teaching philosophies express your values and beliefs about teaching. They're personal statements that introduce you as a teacher to your reader, again, in the context of your discipline. These 6 here are the common components. So your conception of teaching and learning, what goals you might have for your students in your class, the teaching methods you employ, your interactions with students, how you assess their learning, and then what is your commitment to professional growth? How are you going to continue to learn and grow as a teacher? So the next couple of slides will kind of deconstruct each of these components so you can start to think about how you would craft your own teaching philosophy. You'll want to spend some time thinking about the prompts and writing down your ideas. These notes will comprise the material you'll use to write and refine your teaching philosophy. It helps to both include general ideas like I endeavor to create lifelong learners in my classroom, to very specifics in how you actually enact those goals. But in thinking about these 6 here, maybe in the chat, Which of these 6 do you think would be the most enjoyable to write about, and which might be the most challenging?
Well, I think that just throwing it out there, I think that the most enjoyable for me would be the interactions with students, right? I enjoy interacting with my students in various ways. You know, it's been virtual for the most part over the last 2.5, 3 years or so. Looking forward to getting back in the classroom. I think that the most challenging for me right now would be assessment of learning. I have feet both in the very practical neck of the woods, just like you mentioned earlier, and also in a very let's say technical and non-technical information security, right? Where technical is we're moving the data around the network, and non-technical is we're writing the security policies that go along with it. And so switching modes of assessment from back and forth and back is a little bit tricky sometimes, right? And so that's kind of where I think I would find the most challenge right now. And with I think methods coming a very close second to difficulty there, because again, depending on the class, depending on the subject matter, will definitely change and inform the methods that are being used in that class, I think.
Perfect. I agree. Interacting with the students, I love that immediate feedback. You know if it's going well or if you need to change what you're doing, versus maybe the research where that's a long process before you get any feedback. So like I said, we're going to deconstruct these 6 components by thinking and talking about questions that you'll want to be asking yourself as you start to develop them. So the first one is your conception of teaching and learning. So some questions to consider are, what are your values, beliefs, and aspirations as a teacher in your discipline? So again, is it about creating lifelong learners? In my context of education, it might be lifelong learners who are committed to inclusive classrooms, right? Or using culturally relevant practices. Are there unique challenges to teaching in your discipline? For example, is it a heavy writing communication type of discipline, which not everyone comes prepared to be able to deliver that? Or maybe it's heavy mathematics focused content, and we know students don't always have access to good math instruction before they get to college, right? So there might be just these unique challenges that you want the reader to know that, number one, you're aware of them, and what are the ways that you might be combating them. You also are wanting to tell the reader, are you teaching for mastery, competency, transformation, critical thinking? Like, what's the goal here? And we just talked about application, right? So that might be the real goal, right? Translating what we find in the literature or within our research to a broader audience would be the application. And then it's important to think about, how do you develop inclusive learning environments? How do you attend to varied student learning styles, learning needs? Are you a flexible and you meet students where they're at? Or is it all about you and your experience in the classroom, right? The next one is thinking about the goals for students. So what is it that you want students to know as they leave your classroom, right? So do they have a strong understanding of why we need good cybersecurity policy, right? What kind of skills do you want them to have, right? So I don't know anything about cybersecurity, but I'm assuming that there might be coding involved depending on your specific niche in there, right? So there might be those kinds of skills that they need. But also disposition. So what are the behaviors and attitudes that you might want them to bring to bear from your classroom? So I'm assuming in cybersecurity, there's probably a lot of ethical issues involved, right? So how do you train them to think about the ethics involved in what they're creating? How do you help them to think about broad inclusiveness to these coding, right? So there's that behaviors and attitudes. And then most importantly, what are the concrete examples you can provide that are specific to your courses? For example, student writing, maybe that's an important piece, right? Communication. How do you help students become better writers in your course? Perhaps you utilize the writing center to come in and do some basic instruction and then require them to send a draft through the writing center so they understand the importance of feedback. Maybe you do peer feedback within the course. Maybe you do drafts with them, right? They have to submit a first draft, you give them heavy feedback, and then they submit the final, right? Those would be ways to show that you have a strong goal of having good writers come out of your class. The next one is thinking about your teaching methods. So what methods, strategies do you enact to live out your teaching values, beliefs, and aspirations? This may be where you talk about course materials, the way you plan your lessons, what kind of activities, assessments, assignments do you utilize? You also want to think about how do you engage your students in the course? I'm assuming cybersecurity is not a lone wolf kind of process. You are collaborating constantly, right? So a way that you might do that is thinking through case studies, doing some group work, doing some simulations. If you lectured the whole time, that's probably not the best way to engage students in your course content. And then you want to think about how might students have responded to my methods and strategies? And this is an opportunity where maybe you have course evaluations and you can insert a quote or two about how your teaching methods led them to have a better understanding of your course content. So using those kinds of quotes would be a good way to demonstrate and give that specific example. This could also be an opportunity to share a new method or strategy you plan to utilize, right? So maybe you went to a conference and you learned this new technique and now you want to impart it with your students. Again, shows the teaching methods and the commitment to growth in this area. The next one, as we talked about, is interactions with students. What excites you about working with students? Just like we talked about, when they get that aha moment, that could be a way that you talk about your excitement. In that study that I showed you earlier, they talked about the best part of a teaching philosophy was when excitement, enthusiasm came across in how the teaching philosophy was read. You might also want to share what experiences, expertise, and passion do you offer them as your students? And what do they offer you, right? So if it's a co-constructed knowledge where you're learning together, that reads a lot better than I'm the expert and they are here to learn from me, right? So it's talking about that, again, that co-constructed way. It's also important to think about how do you build rapport with your students? How do you get to know them, right? So some faculty, prefer a more collegial relationship. Certainly with my grad students, I have them call me by my first name because I think we're in partnership together. We're collaborating together, which is different than perhaps an undergrad where they're only going to see me once in the context of that class. And I might want more of that professional rather than collegial relationship. You could also talk about things like checking in with your students, right? Maybe at the start of class, it's always like, what did you all do this weekend? As a way to build that rapport and then come back to them later. Like, oh, Michael, went to Great Wolf Lodge this weekend. How might that interact with what you're teaching, right? So just building that little bit of rapport. And then again, I don't want people to ever forget that advising and mentoring is part of teaching, right? So what's your commitment to those aspects? Perhaps you have a lab and you like to have students work in your lab. And so part of your commitment to them is looking for funding so that it's not just volunteers. Perhaps you present with them or publish them with them and give them those kinds of opportunities. Those would be really important to detail in your teaching philosophy. Assessment of learning. So how do you assess student growth and learning? Some do it in a very scientific way, the pre and post, right? This is the knowledge they come in with, and by the end, this is where they're hitting the mark. Or perhaps you want them to do a reflective exercise at the end of class where they talk about what did they learn over your course. You also want to think about what type of assignments do you use? Are you about traditional tests? Are you about projects, portfolios, presentations? Again, ways to hit multiple learning styles and preferences. Then you also want to think about how do you grade and provide feedback? Do you use rubrics? Do you use track changes in Word and give lots of extensive feedback? Is it, scored through some kind of survey software where perhaps they're not getting all of the feedback if it was a written kind of assignment? So all sorts of ways that you grade and provide feedback are important. And then what do you do when a student has not met the learning expectation? Do you reassess your approach? Do you offer opportunities to resubmit? Or are you in a gatekeeping course? And if they can't hit the mark, then that's not the right major for them, right? So there's different ways that you could do that. The last one is commitment to professional growth, which I actually think is the most exciting one, right? Because it's an opportunity for you to demonstrate the ways that you want to continue to grow as a teacher. So what personal goals do you have for yourself, and how will you know if you reach them? Maybe how your teaching has evolved over time. So how you've grown, how you use student evaluations to improve your teaching. In my field in education, we use APA writing style, and students hate it. My evaluations are always like, you're too picky. And I try to tell them it's the language of our profession. You have to be able to have strong facility with it. But I also provide a lot of scaffolding. So the first couple of assignments, I just correct their APA, and I don't take points off to give them that opportunity to grow in those ways, right? So just how do you respond to student feedback? And then there's this growing idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning. So how do you study what you teach and what your students learn? Are there certain activities that you think other cybersecurity faculty would benefit from learning from you? So do you publish that or present that at a conference? So once you kind of get through those questions, there's a couple of ways to organize and to begin writing. So the first one is kind of the most simple, straightforward way. You think about those 6 components and you write 6 paragraphs about what you're trying to talk about in your teaching philosophy. Another way is to take a thematic approach. So look through your notes and highlight what are some ideas that continue to come back, right? So maybe it's the positive interactions with students, and you actually organize your philosophy around 3 or 4 big themes rather than laying it out in those kinds of components. And then, of course, there's the good old 5-paragraph essay approach, where paragraph 1, you're thinking about those big main ideas and beliefs about teaching and learning. You share your teaching goals. And then paragraphs 2 through 4, you outline each goal, right? So again, a goal could be to create better communicators. And then you talk about the ways that you do that within your class. You provide evidence that students have become better communicators because of the work you do with them. And then paragraph 5 is just that concluding summary of your teaching approach, the professional development opportunities that you engage in, and what you plan to do moving forward. And then if this is for a hiring committee, it'd be really helpful to talk about, these are the kinds of courses I have taught, and specific to your department, these are the kinds of classes I would like to teach. I always think it's great to start a teaching philosophy with a hook. Okay, so your job is to make readers want to read more. Their level of engagement is highest when they read your opening line. So how are you going to hook your readers? It might be a question, a statement, an event from your past. So perhaps it's an anecdote, about your experience as a student and how that influences your approach to teaching. So one of my favorite hooks is around my undergraduate research opportunities. And because of that, I'm always wanting to collaborate with students and give them that opportunity to publish, to present, right? So that could be like the foundation of it. You might also want to provide an anecdote where your teaching went really well and how that motivates you to improve your craft. Or you could talk about something that went really bad and what you learned from it, how you grow from it, and how you might do these things differently now. So Matt, in thinking about a hook, does anything come to mind for you?
Well, I think that I would say my experience as a student, right? I just recently finished up a doctoral program, had some classes that I feel like I really kind of rocked it, and some classes that were the hardest classes ever. Like my quantitative research class. I know you will enjoy teaching research and stats, but I'm boy, it sure really gave me a hard time. And so I would probably talk about those types of experiences that I can take from, you know, recent experience over the last, say, 5 years or so, and say, these are the things that I enjoyed, the things that I want to emulate. These are the things that I didn't enjoy, and how can I maybe change those to a positive experience for students when the subject matter just is really difficult or brand new, right? Or constantly changing. That's one thing in the cybersecurity field, is that everything changes practically daily, right? And it's tricky to keep up sometimes. And so how can I help folks ease into it's probably the wrong word, but I can't think of a better word right now. Adapt appropriately to the changing environment that they're going to be faced in, right? Because that's what I had to do as a student, as a cybersecurity doctoral student. Things changed, you know, halfway through the term, right? Like, oh, now we have this threat that we can talk about, yay! And we just kind of ran with it, and it turned out to be a really great and positive discussion when those happened every term, right? and so that would be something that I absolutely would consider as a hook. Kind of, how can we help? How can I help? Not none of this we stuff anymore. How can I help cybersecurity students keep up with the times, right? And here's what happened to me, and here's what I think I can do to help students do that.
I love that, right? So that could be phrased in a couple of lines with 3 big things that you want them to come out of, right? You use the word adaptable, right? So what is it that you do in your classes to show them the importance of adaptability, and then demonstrating adaptability, right? So you can come up with like 3 words as your goals. So I think that's a perfect example. I also wanted to show just some 3 different ways where you might think about being specific. And so I'll read through the first one and hopefully think about how that might fit in your cybersecurity context. So I value helping my students understand difficult information. I'm an expert. My role is to model complex ways of thinking so they can develop the same kinds of habits of mind as a cybersecurity professional, right? And in this context, this is accomplished through written responses to case studies. And then I share how I would respond to that scenario at hand, right? So you give them the opportunity to work through a problem, but then give them another idea, another way of thinking about how they would approach that. So you want to be, again, very specific in how you're thinking about your philosophy. And again, these are 2 pages. It's really a short amount of space to pack in really important information. So once you start thinking about those pieces, you want to go through the editing and revising process. And so the researchers that I had mentioned earlier, at the end, they said, this is what, as a search committee, we look for and want to make sure our candidates are strong in. This comes from the University of Michigan Center for Research on Learning and Teaching, called CERTL. And again, these are the 5 elements that they found that search committees are particularly make note of. The first one is it student-centered? Is it about you, or is it about your students and imparting the knowledge that you have? So are you attuned to differences in student learning preferences? How does the course and the disciplinary context fit into that? If you're using traditional approaches of lecturing and testing for memorization, it's probably not going to come across as student-centered, right? So you want that kinesthetic, active ways for students to learn. You also want to demonstrate that you value the teaching and learning process. Again, this is where enthusiasm plays a big part in you demonstrating that you value that for teaching and then for working with students. You also want to establish that you're a reflective educator. You want to state how you've made changes and how you're committed to continuing to develop your teaching craft. Again, you want to be specific, concrete examples. So how does your teaching fit across different contexts? How does it look in the classroom? How does it look in advising and mentoring students? You don't want to use the generic language, jargon, buzzwords. I'm in education, right? So we have our great educational philosophers that many of us will say, oh, I'm a do-it, right? I am here to construct knowledge and to get students involved in democracy. That doesn't go far in these search committees. They want to actually hear, what is it that you're doing? And forget all the buzzwords that can go along with the teaching. And then, of course, you want to write clearly and have a very readable document. And this is where it's so good to phone a friend, particularly a critical friend who's going to provide you that substantive feedback. Don't send it to a friend who's going to write back, this is great. Yeah, you're ready. No, you want someone who's really going to read it, give you some thoughts. I'm going to share in a couple slides some websites that have rubrics and templates for this that you could even send, right, your philosophy with a rubric and say, how well did I do these things? Where do you see I could improve? Critical friends are wonderful for you. Oh, and we're already here. So the first one is just the citation for that search committee research that was done. The Georgia Institute for Technology Center for Teaching and Learning has tons of templates, has videos, all sorts of great information for you. I don't know if your university is connected to the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. It's a subscription institutional service, and they have tons of videos as well for you to think about.
I don't know. I will have to find out.
Yeah, so check that out. And then our UCCS Faculty Resource Center also has some resources for you. And then I mentioned earlier, the University of Michigan CERTL is definitely seen like as a premier place to go to support teaching and learning. And like I said, they have templates, they have samples across all sorts of disciplines, so it can give you a sense of where you want to end up, but of course, with your context and your discipline in mind. Then finally, what questions do you have? I cannot reiterate enough the importance of having critical friends, using your resources. This is not something that you have to dream up on your own. There's tons of opportunities and resources out there for you.
Boy, I'm not sure that I have any specific questions. This was more of a journey of discovery for me, right? Because I wasn't, I guess, really sure what a teaching philosophy entailed, what all it needed to say about myself, right? As part of this, and not make it sound like an extension of a CV or something like that, right? Which is I've been on enough hiring committees now to know that that is probably not, at least that's not what I'm looking for. And so this has been very, very helpful. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
And it was great to meet you in this context. And I'm going to share the slides with Michael and Gretchen. And so if you have any questions, I can be a critical friend as you're starting to develop that and give you some feedback.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes. Michael, did you have any parting words for us?
I just want to thank everybody for joining us in this 4th session out of 6 of our cybersecurity faculty development workshops. We appreciate your dedication to this resource, Dr. Mendez, and we really hope that this workshop, along with all the rest, will serve as incredibly valuable resources for all those who are looking to become faculty, for those who are already faculty and looking to develop some of their skills, or for those who are just looking to get an idea of what some of the things in the field entail.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.